Chapter 3. Chrissa. 21 Emberus, 569 AF. Chrissa, why do people die? I paused in the act of brushing Lanya's hair. It had become our routine in the evenings, and I sat in a chair before the fire, combing the snarls from its long golden length. She knelt on the floor between my knees and gazed into the flames with a sleepy expression on her small face. The others ceased whispering, growing still in their pallets as they waited for my answer to her question. I could feel their eyes on me, the weight of their stares making my tongue clumsy. I swallowed, trying to forget my memories of Janice's cold, still face as we had buried her beside our mother. Why did people die? What purpose did it serve but to hurt those left behind? Was there even such a place as Chrissa, some heaven those we loved could look down on us from? Or was it simply the gods' way of laughing at us for being weak, pathetic, and mortal? I don't know, dear heart, I said at last, my shoulders slumping. I really just don't know. I know why. Elixir spoke up, his high, childish voice excited. I read it in a book. I glanced over my shoulder at him, unsurprised to see him sitting up in the middle of his pallet, his blanket wrapped around his shoulders like a cape. Kylie lay on her back beside him, staring at the ceiling. Which one? I asked curiously. I had only read a small portion of Janice's books, but Elixir had all but devoured them, reading at least one a day since her death. I did not know if this was normal, he was only 4, but it seemed unlikely. Kylie struggled with her letters, more often than not abandoning her lessons altogether to vanish into the barn. It was called Tales of the First Race. Elixir bounced with excitement. He loved to be the center of attention, and telling stories seemed to come naturally for him. It's about the elder gods and the old ones they created. Will you tell us the story, dear heart? I turned back to brushing Lanya's hair. We'd love to hear it. Well, once the world was only full of the old gods. Elder gods, I mean. And they were good once, not bad like they are now. They got the world right after Destiny made it. But there weren't any people here yet, just dragons and sirens and so on. So the elder gods all got together and made the first race. They called them the Golden Ones. Like me? Lanya tried to turn her head, but I put my hand on it, holding her still. I'm the golden one. No. I could all but feel Elixir shake his head. These golden ones were actually made of gold, or at least their skin was. The pictures show them as really shiny. Anyhow, because the elder gods created them all together, they were able to make them immortal, so the golden ones would never ever die. Never, I repeated. That's a long time. That's what the book said. So the golden ones and the elder gods are really closely connected, because of the gods creating them and all. I don't remember all their names, but there was one god, Ezio, I think, who was secretly bad. The darkness got him. And he corrupted the other gods, and they turned bad, and they were going to turn this world into another Chrissa. I shivered at the thought. Chrissa was the world of the damned, where bad people were sent to suffer after they died. I tried to imagine our fields filled with demons, and was glad when I could not. Because the gods were bad, the golden ones became bad too. That's when they started being called the twisted ones. They stopped being pretty anymore too, but I think that part happened later. Anyway, there was another elder god who didn't turn bad. Diana, goddess of the stars, Kylie interrupted, sounding bored. We've heard that story. Let him tell it, Kylie. I set the brush down, ignoring the sounds of a brief scuffle behind me, and began to braid. Go on, Elixir. So Diana decided to create more races to help fight the darkness, he continued, sounding a bit smug. I guessed that he had won against his twin. But this time she was all alone. She couldn't make them immortal or perfect. She made men and elves and dwarves, but they were all messed up. Men were selfish, and elves were scared, and dwarves were greedy. But destiny told her that it was all right, that they needed to be messed up. It told her that immortality, like what the first race had, was wrong. Souls need to be reborn, to filter through other lives. No one on Caerdia was dying, and it was making Caerlissa die instead. I frowned and looked back at him. Are you sure that's what the book said? How could a world die? He nodded so vigorously I thought his head might come off. I promise, that's what the book said. The worlds need souls, even heaven. Without souls, the worlds would die. It made no sense to me, but then neither did death. I tied off Lanya's braid and tapped her to let her know I was done. She turned around, resting her arms on my knees as she looked up at me. Do you think we die for a reason, Chrissa? I swallowed, staring down into her sapphire eyes, so like my mother's. I think we live for a reason, dear heart, I answered honestly. I'm still not sure yet about death. She nodded, satisfied with my answer, and yawned as she crawled over to her pallet, curling up beside the twins. After a few moments, I heard the quiet, measured sounds of breathing and knew the others had fallen asleep. I stared into the flames of the fire and thought of immortality. 7 Davia, 569 AF. When the snows melted, Father returned to his place at Adelaide's side, seemingly oblivious to the fresh grave beside hers. The full, powerful man of my childhood had vanished, and nothing I could do or say, gods know that I tried in those difficult first months without Janice, would bring him back. He ate, perfunctorily, of the pitiful attempts at meals that I brought to him, sustaining himself as I took over the duties of our farm. The crone returned several months after Janice's death, unbidden and unexpected. She took in our sorry state at a glance, and left again without a word, returning some hours after noon as the sky grew dark with storm clouds. She pulled up to the hill in her rickety cart, which should have shaken itself to pieces on the pitted road that led to our farm, and yanked on the reins. Her gray gelding, Theodore, sighed wearily and slowed to a gentle stop. Kylie, with all the joy of her 6 years, ran toward him and would have thrown herself bodily at his legs had I not caught her arm in a firm grip. She turned her pixie face up to me, laughing. "It's a pony, Chrissa!" Her voice was happy and unafraid. "He's so pretty!" "Yes, dear heart." I forced a weak smile as I allowed her to pet his soft, snuffling nose, once I was certain she wouldn't spook him. Pretty. My gaze returned to the crone, watching as Brannon solemnly helped the ancient woman from her cart, then stepped aside. She made her way across the hill toward the Temenar tree, where Malachi knelt beside Mother's grave. He barely moved to acknowledge the crone's presence, though I could tell he heard her when she called out. The sun blazed down on his hair like a halo, and the clouds rolled across the sky, threatening to smother the light at any moment. I never knew what passed between them beneath that tree, save for what I saw. The crone spoke for several minutes, her words lost in the distance, as she gestured toward us and then to him. She proffered something from her pockets, a dark glass vial, gleaming in her hand in the dying light. My father stared at it for what seemed like a long time. At last he reached out to take it, his hands shaking and skeletal, his eyes burning with a desperate hope in his sunken face. A sense of foreboding struck me, so deep and hard my throat sealed shut with it. Screams rose in me like a tide, threatening to shatter the sudden fragility of my bones. My legs trembled, and I struggled to breathe against the overwhelming fear. He's holding poison. Kylie laughed, Theodore's fine whiskers tickling her hands as he nuzzled. Father drank the crone's offering. There was no immediate change, and yet everything was different. He shook his head, as if waking from a dream, and offered the empty vial back to the crone, who hid it again in her pocket. She spoke a while longer as the clouds finally swallowed the sun, plunging the world into unnatural twilight. Then she turned, leaving my father to keep his vigil, and slowly walked back to her cart. I thought I saw guilt in her gaze as it met mine, regret and shame and immeasurable sorrow, but then she looked away, and it vanished. She climbed slowly back into her cart, unaided by Brannon, who remained silent and somber, watching her. His amber eyes turned to me, and for an instant I felt the same nameless, numbing fear surge in him as it had in me. Kylie gasped and clung to me, burying her face in my skirts in fright. Inside the house, I heard Reese begin to cry, and Lanya's voice rise in a familiar, comforting lullaby. My knuckles turned white as my hands clenched into fists. The crone pulled on Theodore's reins, clucking to him. The gelding sighed and started back down the narrow dirt road toward the unnamed village our mother had once, laughing, named Desperation. I stood, staring after the crone, my heart heavy with fathomless dread as the sky rumbled and the rain at last began to pour. 8 Davia to 16 Vicos, 569 AF. Perhaps it is only my bitterness that causes me to remember my father as weak. Adelaide had been his world, their love like a wildly burning flame between them, melding their hearts together. What would it be like to lose the other half of your soul? Was it possible that the only reason he did not kill himself outright was because of us children? If so, the thought brings precious little comfort. The crone returned every day for months, feeding him more of those dreadful, swirling potions that she bottled in dark glass. He drank them without speaking and stared after her with scorching eyes as she left. My stomach knotted as I approached him with his meals, my dread growing as I watched the dull cast of his eyes spark with animosity, his apathy slowly vanishing into towering anger. I could scarcely breathe near him, the sickly sweet smell of the crone's potion choking me, and I dropped my gaze as quickly as the food, my heart racing as I hurried back to the house and the duties he had forsaken for years. There are 1,000 things necessary for running a farm, and all of them are difficult for a child. Without Janice, it rested on me to rise before dawn every day, to see to the milking of our few goats and the feeding of our assorted animals. I hauled the buckets inside and woke Brannon to fetch the eggs as I began on breakfast, a skill that remained meager at best. When the sun lit the sky, I woke the others. After breaking our fast, we began our chores for the day. Lanya, calm and gentle, looked after the twins and Reese, tending to the small domestic tasks she could manage, as Brannon and I saw to the rest. Repairs, great and small, to the buildings and the house and the equipment were something we struggled with nearly daily. We never seemed to completely fix the leak in the roof above our great room. Laundry, there was always laundry, and I strained for hours to wash linens and clothes, scrubbing the dirt from them in our rusted, dented wash tub outside with 2 heavy stones before hanging them to dry on the line. The house itself had to be cleaned, sweeping, dusting, washing windows, scraping ash from the fireplace. Dishes must be washed, the garden weeded. Luncheon was most often a few vegetables gathered from the gardens, or apples gathered from the trees that grew beside the barn, and we washed them down with warm goat milk. Meager fare, to be sure, but our supplies dwindled rapidly as we did not dare to travel to the village ourselves. The fields lay fallow, since without Janice to pay them, the hirelings had abandoned us, and we were too small to work the plow ourselves. Baths were given in the evenings, especially to the twins, who found accumulating dirt to be a great pleasure. After supper, I stayed up to mend the clothes which needed it most, as the younger children slowly tumbled off into dreams to Lanya's lullabies or to one of Elixon's stories. We had taken back our room a few months after Janice's death. The 4 youngest slept tangled together in the bed, while Brannon and I kept our pallets on the floor. In the end, I would sleep as well, the exhaustion of too much done in a day dragging me down into dreamlessness. Months passed. We settled into this routine, growing used to the exhaustion of it. And then Malachi woke from his trance.